The sun had nearly vanished behind the golden edge of the fields, painting everything in that warm, fading light that made even broken things look beautiful. Ethan wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, smearing grease and sweat together. His tractor had coughed its last breath again, leaving him stranded in the middle of acres that needed tending before the rain came. The machine sat there mocking him with its silence, another reminder of how much he'd lost since the drought began. He leaned against the tire, staring at the endless stretch of dry soil, when the quiet hum of an engine broke the stillness. It was a sound that didn't belong here, not the steady growl of a farmer's pickup, but the smooth purr of something expensive. A black SUV appeared, kicking up a storm of dust as it rolled down the uneven dirt road, its polished surface gleaming like a misplaced jewel in the fading sun. Ethan squinted, confused. Nobody from the city came out this far unless they were lost, or running from something. The car jerked to a stop not far from him, tires slipping slightly in the loose soil. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened and a woman stepped out. She was out of place in every possible way, heels sinking into the mud, a silk blouse too clean for country dust, and eyes that darted nervously toward the horizon as if the wide sky itself was too much space for her. Ethan straightened slowly, pulling off his gloves. "You all right, miss?" he called out, his voice low but steady. She turned toward him, strands of chestnut hair catching the dying light. "My car, it just died," she said, frustration lacing her tone. "I don't know what happened. It was fine a second ago." Her voice was smooth, city-polished, but underneath it was something else, tiredness, maybe even fear. Ethan walked closer, his boots crunching on gravel. "Pop the hood," he said simply, not waiting for her to argue. She hesitated, then obeyed, fumbling with the latch before stepping aside. He leaned over, the smell of gasoline and warm metal filling the air. His hands moved with quiet confidence, checking wires and connections, tapping the battery. She hovered nearby, biting her lip. "You're not from around here," he said without looking up. "What gave it away?" she replied, crossing her arms, her voice half annoyed, half teasing. He smiled faintly. "City folks don't usually get stuck on old farm roads. I was following the GPS," she muttered, "and it told me this was a shortcut." Ethan chuckled. "That thing lies more than it talks." The next afternoon, the fields shimmered beneath the heat, cicadas singing in the tall grass as Ethan worked by the barn, patching up an old plow that had seen better days. Sweat slid down the back of his neck, and the rhythm of his hammer against metal echoed through the quiet valley. He was lost in the work, focused, until the low hum of an engine reached his ears again. He looked up, squinting into the sunlight, and there it was, the same sleek black SUV from yesterday, its tires crunching against the gravel. Ethan blinked, half smiling to himself. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath. The car came to a stop in front of the barn, and the driver's door opened. Claire stepped out, dressed this time in jeans and a white t-shirt, her hair tied up messily but still shining like silk in the sun. She waved awkwardly, almost sheepishly. "I swear I'm not stalking you," she said with a small laugh. Ethan leaned on the handle of his hammer, amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Car trouble again?" "No," she said quickly. "At least not yet. I just wanted to say thank you properly." He wiped his hands on a rag, raising an eyebrow. "You drove all the way back out here just to say that?" "Well," she hesitated, glancing around, "and maybe to see what a real farm looks like. I've only ever seen them in movies." Ethan chuckled softly. "This one's not much to look at," he admitted, glancing at the weather-worn barn and dry fields. "But it's mine," she smiled gently. "Then it's worth more than most of the things money can buy." There was something in her tone, earnest, wistful, that made Ethan pause. He gestured toward the fence. "You ever fed a horse before?" Her eyes widened. "Can't say I have." "Come on then," he said, grabbing a bucket of oats. She followed him cautiously, her heels traded for sneakers now, stepping carefully through the hay and dust. Inside the small stable, the air was cooler, filled with the comforting scent of straw and the soft sounds of snorting horses. "This is Daisy," Ethan said, patting the nose of a gentle chestnut mare. Claire extended a tentative hand, laughing when Daisy nuzzled her palm eagerly. "She likes you," Ethan said. "She likes anyone with oats," Claire replied, grinning. Her laughter bounced off the wooden walls, bright and unguarded, and for a moment Ethan forgot about the bills, the broken machinery and the drought. He watched her face as she stroked the horses. Minnie, there was a tenderness there, Something real that didn't belong to city lights or glass towers. After a while, they stepped outside, the breeze picking up and rustling the wheat fields. Claire stood at the edge, her eyes wide as she took in the horizon. The rain hadn't stopped by the next morning. It came down in long, silvery sheets, soft but relentless, turning the dirt roads into slick ribbons of mud. Ethan stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the world blur behind the curtain of water. It had been months since the farm had felt this alive. The smell of wet earth, the sound of drops tapping against the tin roof, the promise of life returning to the soil. He smiled faintly. Rain meant hope. Then, as if drawn by some invisible thread, a familiar SUV rolled slowly up the drive again, its tires hissing in the puddles. Ethan frowned at first, then chuckled, shaking his head. "She really can't stay away," he muttered. The door opened and Claire stepped out, clutching a jacket over her head, her jeans splattered with mud. "Morning," she shouted over the rain. Ethan set his mug down and stepped off the porch, his boots sinking into the soaked ground. "You trying to flood my driveway or something?" he teased. She grinned. "Maybe, or maybe. I'm just bringing you breakfast." She lifted a small paper bag like it was a trophy. "City coffee and croissants. I figured you might be tired of whatever farmers eat." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Biscuits and eggs. Real food." "We'll see about that," she said, following him up to the porch. They sat on the steps, rain misting around them, steam rising from the mugs as she poured coffee into his chipped cup. "This place feels different when it rains," she said, gazing out at the fields. "Peaceful. Like the world forgot to rush." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's the thing about rain, it slows everything down. Makes you notice what's real." She sipped her drink quietly, her eyes soft. "I used to think real meant big," she said. "Skyscrapers, meetings, names printed on buildings. But here," she trailed off, her gaze drifting to where the wheat bent under the rain. "Here it's like I can finally breathe." They talked for hours, voices mingling with the rhythm of the downpour. She told him about the pressure of being the daughter of Vincent Langford, the billionaire whose company owned half the city, how every choice she made was a shadow of his expectations. "People don't talk to me," she admitted. They talked to his daughter. Ethan listened, his jaw tightening slightly. "That's not living," he said quietly. "That's just existing for someone else's dream." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. The space between them felt fragile and electric. When the rain eased, Ethan led her out to the barn to show her something. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of hay and damp wood. "You ever drive a tractor?" he asked. Claire laughed. 3 days passed, and the fields glistened with new life after the rain. The crops had perked up, the air was softer, and for the first time in months, Ethan could almost feel the land breathing again. Yet even as he worked, turning the soil and checking the irrigation lines, his thoughts kept drifting to her, to Claire, with her easy laughter and restless eyes. He told himself it was foolish, that she was from another world entirely, a world of luxury cars and glass towers, but that didn't stop him from glancing down the road every time he heard an engine or catching himself replaying her smile in the quiet hours before dawn. On the fourth evening, as the sun burned orange across the horizon, Ethan was stacking hay near the barn when the familiar sound returned, the low, smooth purr of her SUV. He froze for a second, a hammer still in his hand, before wiping his palms on his jeans. The car stopped just short of the fence, and Claire stepped out, but something was different. She wasn't smiling this time. Her usual calm was gone, replaced by tension that clung to her like the evening humidity. "Ethan," she called, her voice low, almost trembling. He walked toward her slowly, concern etched into his features. "What's wrong?" She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "He found out, my father, about me coming here." Ethan frowned. "And that's a problem because—" She gave a shaky laugh that wasn't really laughter at all. "Because he thinks you're trying to use me to get something. He thinks you're after money, land, an opportunity, something. He doesn't understand that you—" She trailed off, biting her lip hard. "That I what?" Ethan asked gently. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "That you just helped me. That you made me feel—" Her words broke and she took a shaky breath. "He's sending people. He wants me back in the city tonight." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're not a prisoner, Claire." "No," she whispered. "But you don't know my father. When he wants something, there's no saying no. She stepped closer, the wind tugging at her hair. I came here to tell you before they show up. I didn't want you caught in the middle. Ethan looked past her, at the distant dust cloud rising over the road, black cars approaching. Just like she'd said. He exhaled slowly, his chest heavy. Guess the cavalry's coming, he muttered. She flinched at the bitterness in his tone. Ethan, please don't be angry. He looked at her then. Really looked and saw not a spoiled city girl, but someone torn between two worlds. Someone fighting for air in a life that was suffocating her. Angry? He said softly. No, just sorry. Weeks passed, and the world slowly settled into its rhythm again. The farm began to flourish, green shoots rising proud from the once barren soil. Ethan threw himself into the work, fixing fences, feeding animals, planting with a focus that left no room for thoughts of what he'd lost. But even in the quiet, even when the wind was kind and the days long, her face haunted him, Claire, with her rain-soaked laughter and trembling goodbye. Every night he caught himself glancing at the horizon, half expecting headlights to appear on that lonely dirt road again. They never did. Then one afternoon, as he loaded hay into the barn, the sound came, low, steady, and impossible to mistake. The same black SUV rolled up the drive, its sleek shape catching the sunlight. Ethan froze, heart hammering. The door opened and Claire stepped out. But this time there was no hesitation, no distance in her gaze. She wore worn jeans, a plaid shirt tied at her waist, and her hair danced freely in the breeze. You're supposed to be in the city, he said, almost afraid to believe it. She smiled softly. I was. Until I told my father I quit. Ethan blinked. You what? I sold my shares, gave up the position, everything. I told him I needed to build something that mattered to me, not to him. She stepped closer, pulling something from her pocket. It was the wooden wheat keychain he'd carved. You left this on my seat, she said. I kept it. It reminded me of you, of what's real. Ethan looked at her, emotion tightening his chest. So what now? He asked quietly. Claire took a deep breath, her eyes bright. Now I start over, here, if you'll let me. For a moment, neither moved, the silence heavy with everything left unsaid. Then Ethan reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing against her soft skin. You really think you can handle farm life? He teased gently. Guess we'll find out, she said, smiling through her tears. The wind rustled through the wheat as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fire and gold. They stood there in the open field, hand in hand, two people from different worlds finally meeting in the same one. For Ethan, the land no longer felt empty. For Claire, it was the first place that ever felt like home. And as the light faded, a new beginning took root, one built not on wealth or power, but on the quiet, stubborn miracle of love and second chances.